The demon of Brownsville Road. They say that some places have memories, not the kind that fade with time, but the kind that linger like shadows, clinging to the walls, whispering through the hallways, and turning dreams into nightmares. Brownsville Road in Pittsburgh was one such place. It was the summer of 1995 when we moved into the old Victorian on Brownsville Road. The house was a thing of beauty, a relic of the past with its grand staircase, stained glass windows, and towering spires. It had stood for over a century, watching the world change around it, yet somehow remaining untouched by time. Or so we thought. The locals had warned us, of course. They said the house had a reputation, a dark one. But we were young, eager to start our new life, and we dismissed the rumors as nothing more than old wives' tales. After all, we were rational people. We didn't believe in ghosts. We didn't believe in demons. The first few weeks were peaceful. The house was large, almost too large, and it took some time to get used to its creaks and groans. But soon those sounds became part of the house's charm. We laughed them off, chalking them up to the house settling, or the wind rustling through the trees outside. But then, the laughter stopped. It began with the little things. Objects moved from their place, cold spots in the hallway, and whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. My wife, Emily, was the first to notice. She swore she heard someone calling her name at night. A voice so soft it was almost a breath. I dismissed it, of course. Stress, I told her. Moving to a new place, getting used to a new routine. But deep down, I felt it too. The sense of being watched, the prickling on the back of my neck, the feeling that something was wrong. Then, one night, things escalated. Emily had gone to bed early, leaving me alone in the living room. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, the only sound in the house. I was reading, lost in the pages of a book, when I heard it. A low growl, coming from the darkness beyond the door. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I called out, thinking it was the dog, but there was no response. The growl grew louder, closer, vibrating through the floorboards. And then, the lights went out. I was plunged into darkness, the room suddenly cold, as if the very air had been sucked out. I stood, fumbling for a flashlight, when I heard it. A thud, then a dragging sound, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I knew in that moment that I wasn't alone. I swung the flashlight beam around, the light cutting through the dark, but there was nothing there, nothing but shadows. I called out to Emily, my voice trembling, but she didn't answer. Panic gripped me as I stumbled up the stairs, the growl still echoing in my ears. I burst into our bedroom, expecting to find her asleep, but the bed was empty. The window was open, curtains fluttering in the night breeze, but she was gone. I searched the house, my heart in my throat, but she was nowhere to be found. I called the police, thinking she had somehow wandered off in her sleep, but they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of a struggle, nothing. And that's when the scratching started. It began in the walls, a soft, insistent sound, like nails on wood. It grew louder each night, spreading from room to room, until it filled the house. It was as if the very walls were alive, breathing, scratching, trying to get out. I tried to leave the house, but the doors wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut, and no matter how hard I pulled, they wouldn't budge. We were trapped with whatever was inside. The growling, the scratching, the whispers. They were all around us now, surrounding us, closing in. And then, one night, as I lay in bed too terrified to sleep, I felt it. A hand, cold and clammy, gripping my ankle. I screamed, kicking out, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the darkness, the growling, and the realization that whatever was in this house, it wasn't human. I knew then that the rumors were true. The house was cursed, haunted by something ancient, something evil. And it wanted us. It wanted our souls. But this was just the beginning. The terror that awaited us. It was far beyond anything I could have imagined. The history of this house, the blood that had been spilled, the rituals that had been performed here. It was all coming back, and it was hungry. We were not alone on Brownsville Road. We were never alone. And what was coming for us? It would stop at nothing until it had claimed us all. The days after that encounter in the basement blurred into a twisted nightmare. Sleep eluded me, and when I did manage to drift off, the dreams were filled with visions of the symbols, the creature, and that hand, clawing, grasping, trying to pull me down into the darkness. Emily was still missing, and with each passing hour, the house's grip on me tightened. The walls seemed to close in, the shadows growing darker, thicker, almost alive. The whispers were no longer confined to the basement. They followed me everywhere, growing louder, more insistent, until they became a chorus of maddening voices, screaming in my head. I knew I had to find out what was happening, what this house truly was, and what had happened to Emily. But every time I tried to leave, the doors refused to open. The windows were sealed shut, and the phone was nothing but dead static. I was trapped, and the house knew it. I spent hours combing through the few belongings left behind by the previous owners, desperate for any clue. I found old newspapers, yellowed with age, that hinted at the house's dark past. Stories of disappearances, violent deaths, and unexplained phenomena. But it wasn't until I stumbled upon a dusty journal hidden behind a loose brick in the fireplace that I began to piece together the horrifying truth. The journal belonged to a man named Daniel Corrigan, who had lived in the house with his family over 70 years ago. His entries started off normal enough. Details of daily life, the joy of watching his children grow. But as the pages turned, the tone shifted. He wrote of strange occurrences, much like the ones I was experiencing. Whispers in the night, objects moving on their own, a growing sense of dread. Then came the rituals. Corrigan detailed how he had discovered the symbols in the basement, how he had been drawn to them, unable to resist their pull. He described performing strange rites, chanting incantations in a language he didn't understand. He had been desperate, trying to rid the house of the evil that plagued it. But instead of banishing the darkness, he had unleashed something far worse. Corrigan's last entry was barely legible, scrawled in a frantic hand. He wrote of the demon he had summoned, a creature of pure malevolence that fed on fear and suffering. It had taken his wife, his children, and now it was coming for him. The final words on the page sent a chill down my spine. Asterisk, the house is alive. It wants us all. Asterisk. As I closed the journal, a sense of overwhelming dread washed over me. Corrigan had unleashed the demon, but it hadn't been destroyed. It had been waiting, biding its time, growing stronger with each passing year. And now it had me. Suddenly a loud crash echoed from upstairs, snapping me out of my thoughts. I bolted up the stairs, the floorboards creaking ominously beneath my feet. The noise had come from the master bedroom. My heart pounded as I approached the door, which was ajar, slowly swinging back and forth as if inviting me in. I pushed it open and froze. The room was in disarray. Furniture overturned, drawers pulled out, their contents strewn across the floor. But what caught my eye was the large, ornate mirror on the wall. The glass was cracked, a spiderweb of fractures spreading across its surface. And in the center of the mirror, scrawled in what looked like blood, were the words, "Asterisk, help me." Asterisk. It was Emily's handwriting. I staggered back, the room spinning around me. Emily was still here, somewhere in this cursed house, but she wasn't alone. The demon had her, was torturing her, using her to get to me. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all, but before I could process what I'd seen, the room plunged into darkness. A low growl resonated from the shadows, deep and menacing, reverberating through the walls. I turned, and there it was. The creature from the basement, emerging from the blackness, its hollow eyes fixed on me, its twisted grin widening as it stepped closer. I scrambled for the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. I was trapped. The growling grew louder, the air thick with the stench of decay. The creature moved with an unnatural speed, closing the distance between us in an instant. It lunged, and I threw myself to the side, crashing into the dresser. Pain shot through my ribs, but I forced myself to move, to crawl towards the only window in the room. The creature was on me before I could get far, its icy hands wrapping around my ankle, dragging me back. Across the floor, I kicked out, desperate to free myself, and my foot connected with something solid. The creature hissed, a sound like nails on a chalkboard, and for a split second its grip loosened. I seized the moment, scrambling to my feet, and hurled myself at the window. Glass shattered around me as I crashed through, landing hard on the roof outside. I gasped, blood running down my arms from the cuts, but I couldn't stop. The creature's growl echoed behind me, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it followed. I staggered across the roof, heading for the drain pipe that led down to the ground. But as I reached it, something cold and wet splattered onto my face. I wiped it away, my hand coming back covered in blood? I looked up and my heart stopped. The sky above me was dark, swirling with black clouds that churned and twisted like a living thing. Blood rained down from the clouds, soaking me, staining the roof red. And in the midst of the storm, I saw them, figures twisted and contorted, writhing in agony, their faces locked in eternal screams of pain. The storm was alive, and it was coming for me. Before I could react, the roof beneath me gave way. I plummeted into the darkness below, crashing through beams and floorboards until I hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud. Pain exploded through my body, but I forced myself to stay conscious. I was back in the basement. The symbols on the floor were glowing again, pulsing with a sickly green light. The whispers returned, louder now, chanting in that ancient cursed language. The hand had returned, clawing its way up from the dark void in the center of the symbols. And this time, it wasn't alone. More hands emerged, followed by twisted, grotesque forms, dragging themselves up from the depths of the house's black heart. The creatures were smaller than the one upstairs, but no less terrifying. Each a mockery of the human form, twisted and broken, with eyes that glowed with an unnatural light. They crawled towards me, their mouths opening in silent screams, their fingers clawing at the air, desperate to drag me down into the darkness. I tried to move, to get away, but my body wouldn't respond. I was paralyzed, helpless as the creatures closed in, their hands reaching for me, their whispers growing louder, more frantic. And then, just as they were about to touch me, they stopped. The basement door creaked open, and a figure stood in the doorway. It was Emily. Her eyes were wide, filled with terror, her skin pale and translucent as if she were fading away. She stared at me, her lips moving, but no sound came out. And then slowly she raised her hand and pointed behind me. I turned, and there, standing at the edge of the circle, was the creature. Its hollow eyes burned with a malevolent fire, its twisted grin wider than ever. But this time it wasn't alone. Behind it stood a man I recognized from the old photos I'd found in the house. It was Daniel Corrigan, but he wasn't a man anymore. He was something else. Something dark and twisted, his body warped by the same evil that had consumed the house. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on mine, and for the first time, he spoke. "You can't escape!" he rasped, his voice like the rustling of dead leaves. "The house wants you. It wants your soul." I tried to scream, to run, but the creatures held me down, their cold hands pinning me to the floor. Corrigan's twisted form loomed over me, and he raised a knife, its blade glinting in the sickly light. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and the last thing I saw before the blade came down was Emily's face, twisted in agony as she mouthed a single word. "Run!" The blade came down fast, but at the last moment something within me surged, an instinct for survival so primal, so raw, that it took control. My hand shot up, catching Corrigan's wrist just inches before the knife plunged into my chest. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through my arm, but I held on, gritting my teeth as I pushed back with every ounce of strength I had left. The creatures around me hissed and snarled, their grip tightening as they tried to drag me down. But something had changed. The whispers, once deafening, began to falter, as if confused. The glow of the symbols on the floor flickered, dimming with each passing second. Corrigan's twisted face contorted with rage, his eyes burning with hatred. He pressed down harder, the knife trembling above me. But I could see it. He was struggling. Whatever hold the house had over him, it was weakening. And in that moment, I knew. This was my only chance. With a roar of defiance, I wrenched the knife from his grasp and plunged it into the floor, directly into the center of the glowing symbols. The blade sank deep into the wood, and as it did, a blinding light erupted from the wound, flooding the room with a searing brightness. The creatures recoiled, their screams filling the air as they were consumed by the light, their forms disintegrating into ash. The whispers turned into shrieks of agony, and the entire house seemed to shudder, as if in pain. The walls cracked, the floor buckled, and the air was filled with the sound of splintering wood and shattering glass. Corrigan stumbled back, his body convulsing as the light engulfed him. For a brief moment, his twisted form shimmered, and I saw the man he once was, terrified, desperate, and lost. He looked at me, his eyes filled with sorrow, and then he was gone, consumed by the same light that had taken the creatures. The house groaned, the very foundation shaking as if it were being torn apart from the inside. I scrambled to my feet, the ground trembling beneath me, and ran for the stairs. The basement door slammed shut behind me as I bolted up, but I didn't stop. The house was collapsing and I had to get out. As I reached the top of the stairs, the front door burst open, a gust of freezing air rushing in. I could see the outside world, bathed in the pale light of dawn, so close, just within reach. But something stopped me. A voice, faint but clear, calling my name. I turned, my heart pounding, and there she was, Emily, standing at the top of the stairs, her hand outstretched. Her eyes were no longer filled with terror, but with something else. Hope. I took a step toward her, but the house groaned again, the floor beneath her feet giving way. She gasped, her hand reaching out to me, but before I could react, the ground crumbled and she fell, disappearing into the darkness below. "No!" I screamed, rushing to the edge. But there was nothing there, just an endless void where the floor had been, the light from below now gone. The house was swallowing her whole, dragging her into the abyss, and there was nothing I could do. But then, from the darkness, her voice echoed up to me, calm, serene. "Run, you have to run." Tears filled my eyes as I turned back to the open door. I wanted to stay, to fight, to save her. But deep down I knew the truth. The house had her now, and it wouldn't let go. It was too late for Emily, but it wasn't too late for me. I ran! The ground shook beneath my feet as I bolted through the door, the cold air hitting me like a wall. I didn't stop until I was outside, standing in the middle of the overgrown lawn, watching as the house trembled, the walls bowing inward, the roof caving in. And then, with a deafening roar, the house collapsed, the ground swallowing it whole, leaving nothing but a smoldering crater where it had once stood. The air was filled with dust and debris, the sky darkened by the remnants of the house's final moments. I fell to my knees, gasping for breath, my mind reeling from everything that had happened. The house was gone, but at what cost? Emily. My Emily was gone too, lost to the darkness that had consumed the house. As I knelt there, broken and alone, I felt something cold touch my cheek. I looked up, and for a moment I saw her. Emily standing in the distance, her figure bathed in a soft, ethereal light. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile, and then she was gone, fading into the morning mist. The police arrived soon after, responding to the neighbors' calls about the noise and the collapse. They found me sitting in the yard, staring at the crater where the house had been. They asked me what had happened, but I couldn't explain. How could I? How could anyone understand the horror I had witnessed, the loss I had endured? They took me away, back to a world that no longer made sense, a world that felt empty without her. But as they drove me away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that something, some part of the house, still lingered, waiting, watching. And then, as we rounded the corner, leaving Brownsville Road behind, I saw it. In the rearview mirror, just for a second, the house stood tall and intact as if nothing had ever happened. The front door was wide open, and standing in the doorway was Emily, her eyes fixed on me, her smile cold, twisted. My breath caught in my throat, and I blinked, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But when I looked again, she was still there. Only now, there were others with her. Shadowy figures stood behind her, their faces obscured by darkness, their forms barely distinguishable. But I could feel their eyes on me, all of them, watching with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The car turned another corner, and the house disappeared from view. My heart pounded in my chest, and I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to erase the image from my mind. But it was no use. The memory of that house, and the horrors it contained, had seared itself into my soul. Days passed, and I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the events of Brownsville Road haunted me. Every shadow, every creak of the floorboards sent a wave of panic through me. Sleep was impossible, the nightmares were relentless. I saw Emily every night, standing at the foot of my bed, her eyes empty, her mouth twisted into that same unnerving smile. But the worst part was the whispers. Even though I was miles away from that cursed house, I could still hear them. Soft, insistent, always just at the edge of my hearing. They were there when I was alone, when I was with others. Even in the dead of night when the world was silent. They never stopped, and they never let me forget. I started researching the history of Brownsville Road, desperate to find some explanation, some closure. What I discovered only deepened the horror. The land the house had been built on was cursed long before the first brick was laid. It was said to have been the site of ancient rituals, blood sacrifices to dark, forgotten gods. Over the centuries, countless people had vanished or died under mysterious circumstances, their souls claimed by whatever malevolent force haunted the place. I found records of other families who had lived there, all meeting tragic ends. Suicides, unexplained deaths, disappearances. But the records always ended the same way. The house would stand empty for years, as if waiting, until a new family moved in, and the cycle began again. I realized, with a sinking dread, that the house was never truly destroyed. It couldn't be. The evil that dwelled there wasn't bound by walls or mortar. It was in the very earth, in the air, in the souls it had claimed. And now, it had Emily. But it didn't just have her, it had me too. I could feel it, creeping into my thoughts, into my dreams, into the very core of my being. The house was calling me back, and I knew that no matter how far I ran, how hard I tried to escape, it would find me. It would always find me. The final straw came one night, weeks after I had left Brownsville Road behind. I was sitting in my apartment, staring at the TV without really seeing it, when the lights began to flicker. The temperature in the room dropped, and the whispers, which had been a constant but faint presence, suddenly grew louder, more urgent. And then the TV went black, replaced by static. A chill ran down my spine as I watched the screen, unable to look away. Slowly, the static began to shift, to form images. Images of the house, of the basement, of the symbols carved into the floor. And then Emily's face appeared, twisted in terror, her mouth open in a silent scream. I jumped up, knocking over my chair, and backed away from the TV. But the image remained, burned into the screen, as if it were staring back at me. And then, the whispers stopped, replaced by a single, clear voice. Emily's voice. "Come back," she said, her voice soft, pleading. "Come back to me." Tears filled my eyes as I shook my head, backing away further. But the voice persisted, growing more insistent. "Come back or I'll never leave you. I'll haunt you forever." My heart pounded, and I collapsed to the floor, covering my ears, but it was no use. Her voice was inside my head now, relentless, inescapable. "Come back." I don't know how long I sat there, but when I finally looked up, the TV was off. the room dark and silent. But I knew what I had to do. There was no other choice. If I didn't go back, if I didn't confront whatever evil had taken Emily, it would never leave me. It would haunt me for the rest of my life. And worse, it would keep her trapped in that house, in that darkness, forever. So I packed a bag, got in my car, and drove. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. They wouldn't have understood. They would have tried to stop me, to talk me out of it. But nothing could stop me now. I had to end this, once and for all. The drive back to Brownsville Road was a blur. My mind raced with fear, with anticipation, with a sense of inevitability. The house was calling me, pulling me back to where it all began, and I couldn't resist. When I finally arrived, it was just before dawn. The house stood exactly as it had before. Tall, imposing, untouched by the destruction I had witnessed. The front door was wide open, as if inviting me in. I stepped out of the car, the air thick with the scent of decay, and walked towards the house. Every step felt heavy, as if the ground itself was trying to drag me down. But I kept going, driven by a force I couldn't explain. As I crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind me, sealing me inside. The house was dark, the only light coming from the dim glow of the basement door, which was slightly ajar. I knew where I had to go. The basement was where it had all begun, and it was where it would end. I descended the stairs, each step echoing in the silence. The symbols were still there, glowing faintly, and in the center of the room stood Emily. But she wasn't alone. The creature was there too, its hollow eyes fixed on me, its twisted grin wide and malevolent. And behind it, the shadows shifted and moved, taking the form of all the souls the house had claimed over the centuries. They were all there, trapped, waiting for me. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had come this far, and I knew what I had to do. I walked towards Emily, my heart breaking as I saw the fear in her eyes. She reached out to me, her hand trembling, and I took it, pulling her close. "I'm here," I whispered. "I'm not leaving you." The creature growled, its eyes burning with fury, and the shadows began to close in. But I held on to Emily, refusing to let go. And then, I did the only thing I could think of. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the knife I had taken from Corrigan. The blade was still stained with the blood of whatever evil had been summoned all those years ago. I raised the knife, and with all the strength I had left, I plunged it into the center of the symbols on the floor. The room exploded with light, brighter than anything I had ever seen. The creatures screamed, their forms dissolving into nothingness, and the shadows recoiled, retreating into the darkness. The house shuddered, the walls cracking, the floor buckling beneath me. But I held on to Emily, refusing to let her go. As the light consumed us, I heard the whispers again. But this time they were different. They were fading, growing weaker, until they disappeared altogether. And then just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light faded, and I found myself standing outside the house, the dawn breaking over the horizon. The house was gone, nothing but a pile of rubble where it had once stood. Emily was gone too. I fell to my knees, tears streaming down my face, but I knew that she was free. The house was destroyed, the demon vanquished, and Emily's soul was finally at peace. I stayed there for a long time, watching as the sun rose, filling the sky with light. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a sense of calm, of closure. But as I got up to leave, I heard it, just a faint whisper, carried on the wind. "Come back." I looked around, but there was nothing there. Nothing but the empty road and the ruins of the house. But I knew that the evil that had haunted Brownsville Road wasn't gone. Not completely. It was still out there, waiting, watching, and one day it would return. And when it did, I would be ready.